Thank you. All right, shall we get started? All right. The Lord be with you. God, we thank you for this time to gather, for the work of Kitty and others on the parish care team to bring this together, a time to consider all the decisions and needs that we have as we age and as we prepare for others in our families who are aging. Help us to come together as a community in support and love for everyone at every stage of life. You carry us from our first breath until our last, and we pray that as we are made in your image, we accompany your people from first breath until our last. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. So, today, let me start. Last week, some of you were here, I guess, for the conversation last with Kitty and Abigail and Kristen, the lawyer from we don't know, but she did a beautiful job helping to prepare us a little bit with financial, medical, legal issues and things that come up as we age. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about spiritual issues, and I also want to talk a little bit about kind of developmental issues, the spiritual issues that come as you age and that stage of your development. So I'm going to try to pick up where we are, pick up kind of at that place where people begin, if they do, not everyone does, but if they do, begin to lose their independence. That's kind of where I'm going to pick up the conversation, and to that point and through death. And what I'm going to share today is really from my own experience and a little bit of training, but mostly my experience. And I just added it up, and this next summer I will have been ordained 25 years. I can't believe I'm that old already, but there you go. So I've got a few years and a few experiences, so I'll share those, but they're not by any means sort of all that one might think about for this period of life. It's interesting, as I was reflecting on the people that I've served in different congregations, aging is not a straightforward linear thing. It doesn't happen the same way for every person by any stretch. There's a woman in my last parish in California who we celebrated her 90th birthday party, and when her family came to me and said, we want to do something special for her 90th birthday, I almost fell off my chair because I thought she was about 60. I mean, she just, some people age like you don't see it, and she never seemed to slow down and just so vibrant at 90. And others can be 75 and start to be heading into that loss of independence already, not able to take care of all their affairs and so on. So it's really not something you can be certain about, and so it certainly helps to plan ahead as much as you can to at least think about some of the eventualities and some of the things you need to consider. So I want to talk about spiritual care for those of us who do or will lose our independence. It can happen at any age, and for some it never happens, as I said, but it's helpful to think for if it happens to you, if it happens to a family member, or to a fellow parishioner. And this is where I think it's important for us to have these conversations as a parish, because the needs of aging people, like the needs of children, are not just an individual affair when we are Christian, right? They are our responsibility and our interest as a church community as well, as families and as individuals. So some of the signs that you or someone you love may be heading toward that position where they're not able to be as independent, that you see people slowing down in their body and their mind, they're sleeping more, they may begin to help People are starting to look at each other. Stop that. You may find yourself or someone you love at the point where you can no longer, you're struggling to take care of all of your own affairs, right? Paying the bills, keeping track of things. Your kids or your loved ones don't want you driving at night anymore, or don't want you driving at all anymore. Your home starts to feel like it's just way too much to take care of. Now, I feel like that right now, but that's from being in the other stage of life where you have a kid and a mom who's aging. You may have, begin to have trouble getting in and out of bed on your own. When you grow to the point, or you're observing someone who grows to the point where you're afraid of their fall risk, be afraid, right? That fear is a good signal. It means that you or that person isn't very steady on their feet. So listen to your worries, and even though you know that it means a loss of independence, it is also a fact of life and part of life. And it doesn't help for us to run away from those things. Kind of denial does not serve you well when you are trying to plan for these eventualities. As hard as that is to say and to face, you can face it a whole lot better, I think, when you face it honestly and truthfully. And ask for some help. So as more and more those kinds of things add up together, that's when it's harder and harder to maintain independence. Now, some people can afford to hire help and stay at home for a long time, and that's a great choice if you can afford it. There are organizations out there. There's an organization called, I think it's called Aging in Place, that is worth consulting if you want to stay at home as long as possible to see how you can arrange things so that you have the help you need and can afford it. Some choose to sell their home and to move into a retirement home with everything from, independent care to assisted living. Independent care, you really have to be independent. It's just that you want to have a community around you. Assisted living is where, there will be somebody to come and help you with your medications. They will check on you. But again, they don't provide a lot of extra care, but somebody else cleans your house generally, and your meals are provided. That's a nice thing to have at a certain stage if you can afford it. Then there are places called continuum of care communities that go from everything from independent living, where you're driving your car and you're going to and fro, you're taking care of your own space. You might take a few meals with a group, but you can cook on your own, that kind of independent living, to assisted living, to skilled nursing, where you have nursing care around the clock. So those are fantastic if you can afford it. You generally have to, sign over your entire estate to make that happen, but that can be a very good choice for some people. And for those of us who can't afford those options, either to hire in help or to stay at home, we also, there may be the choice to stay at home, not just because you can't afford it, but because your kids are nearby, or you have a community around you that is a community of support and love. Just for example, when we moved to North Carolina from California, we had made the decision, we had a whole consultation with my mother-in-law, who had just lost her husband a couple of years prior, and she said she was ready to come and move in with us. And we bought a house accordingly. We bought a house with 2 master bedrooms, 1 upstairs, 1 downstairs. It is way more house than my family of 3 needs. And then she got cold feet because her whole family, her generation of our family, is in Ohio. And all of her friends, she's lived there in the same house for over 50 years. Those are hard things to give up. We thought we were like, you couldn't pass up being with your grandchild. How could you pass that up? But some of the realities are that, as we've learned, that she comes down to spend time with us, and we're like a whirlwind. We're running around like crazy, and she doesn't feel like she's a part of it, right? She feels she's going at a different pace, and we're just going like this, and it doesn't feel right to her. At some point, there might be a need for her to come, and we have to really think about how we are with her. Maybe slow down our lives a little bit, so to make space that's hospitable for her. So, lots to think about. So there are options, and I think at some point, because I am not an expert in this, but there are options for resources to help you at any stage of wanting to stay at home, to living with children or extended family, to independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, and that continuum of care that I talked about. So there are resources out there. It'd probably be helpful for us to have somebody come at some point and give a talk about those options. I think one thing that I see, just again, anecdotally from my experience, is that it's often tough to find a spot. Just talking with somebody this morning about trying to find a spot for a parent. And right now, there's a lot of demand and not as much supply. But the baby boomers are hitting that age, are beginning to hit that age. And so I expect that the market will respond, and that there are going to be a lot more options for aging in place and retirement homes. Whether they become any more affordable, who knows? So it would be helpful, I think, to have somebody to come talk with us about those choices and how you can plan a little bit better financially if you have the time to do that. So backing up a little bit and talking about, I'd like to just address a little bit the developmental and the spiritual needs of those who are at that stage of aging where you begin to really lose your independence. I was thinking about that this week, and when I first became a parent, I did this parenting course, and I thought it was brilliant what they said to us about kids. That kids, and it's like, okay, that means all human beings. Kids, like all human beings, have two primary needs every day. You can think of them as having a need, like there's a bucket for agency, power. They need the ability to make some decisions and do some things on their own. And they also need connection. They need to feel that they are loved, that they're supported, that they're heard and understood and known. What human does not have those two needs? The same needs that you have as a child are the same needs you have when you are at that stage when you're losing independence. And it's important for us who are not in that stage to remember that. Because just as with children, with aging parents, or when we get to that point ourselves, we can find ourselves, like I think my mother-in-law sometimes finds herself, bristling at our attempts to intervene, to help her make decisions, to help her do anything. Because it's that, I want to be independent, I want to make my own decisions. So I think it just helps that when you start to encounter some resistance from a loved one, think about those things. Where is this coming from? Is it coming from a desire, that sense of losing agency and ability to make your own decisions? Or is it coming because I'm alone, I'm lonely and frustrated and angry that my life has gotten small because I can't get out in a car and go drive where I want to drive and go do and be with who I want to be, or all my friends have died. And I'm more and more alone. So I think that is something very important to think about, not just, again, in families, but as a church community. It's part of the reason why we've come up with the idea and tried to promote visitation ministry. Because once people get to that point where they can't get out, It is great that we have now the AV system, but that's no replacement for in-person conversation, a hug, a relationship. So it's important as a community that we don't forget people just when they can't come anymore and be part of the church. The church is not just the gathered community, it is the whole body, wherever we are. And I think the other thing that I wanted to kind of pass along about this, and this is good for us who are not at that stage yet, to think about how we take care of ourselves and our loved ones. Because I don't know if anyone is familiar with Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest and writer. He has written a book called Falling Upward. And it's about he calls it the second half of life, which also can happen at any age. He's talking about a development or a spiritual process. And the first half of life, he talks about how we are more ego-driven. We have our ego needs take precedence. We need to feel that we're worthwhile and doing something and accomplishing and sort of building the strength of our worth in the world, feeding our ego. That's not to say we're egomaniacs, but just that's a part of a developmental need that all of us have as human beings. But he says in the second half of life, which it can happen for a 20-year-old who receives a terminal diagnosis, right? He knows his life is going to be short, and so he shifts into that second half of life mentality, even though he's 20 years old. It can happen at any age, but that shift happens when we begin to move out of as much self-centeredness, and we become more interested in serving others, in sort of passing along something that we have, experience, wisdom. Some people never enter the second half of life, is the other part that Richard Rohr says. Some of us are perpetually children and never think that way. And that's another lens through which to look at yourself and your loved ones. Where are they in that spectrum? Are they, even though they're not able to get out, perhaps, how does one help them fulfill that need to continue to contribute to the world and feel that they're meaningful and have purpose? Is there, we can be creative as a community and as families in how we help people think about those things. Like Kitty and I have had these conversations around parish care because, you don't have to be able to have a car to engage in parish care. You can pick up a phone and you can call someone. So those who are themselves alone and homebound could be callers and call somebody else who's in that position and be an encouragement or a friend, a companion. So there's lots of things that we can do to help people. Here's another example. Joy did a program a few years ago with the kids where, I forget what she called it. It was something like Teach Me Something, or so if you remember this one, but it was where she would find somebody in the parish, an older member of the parish, who knows how to sew buttons. It's like the kids who are getting ready to graduate from high school and go off to college, they need to know how to boil an egg and sew a button on and, do little things like that. Cook for yourself. Fix a lawnmower, that kind of thing. And so Joy hooked up parishioners who were older and had some skills like that with our teens, and they got to know each other and showed each other, and then the kids were showing them usually some kind of digital skill that that older folks don't come easily by. So that's a wonderful kind of connection to make that honors the fact that even at whatever age we are, we have a desire and a need still to contribute and make a difference in the world, right? So as a community, we can think about those things, and we can think about those things for our loved ones. There's another little bit that I thought I'd share. Is anybody familiar with that concept? There's some research out there called Blue Zones research. Have you heard of this?
What's it called?
Blue Zones research. Have you heard of this? Oh my goodness. Blue Zones. So some researchers have discovered that they called them blue zones just arbitrarily, but that there are communities, areas in the world that where the people have much greater longevity and happiness than other places in the world. Right? So Okinawa, Japan is one of them. Sardinia, Italy. Loma Linda, California, of all places. But that is linked with the fact that it's a very highly concentrated community of Adventists, Seventh-day Adventists. They have very particular health kind of practices and are very communal. Like they don't let people get old and be alone. So studying those blue zones, they've come up with a number of things that correlate with longevity and happiness. And I'm oversimplifying it, but they do have they call it the power of nine things that they've drawn from looking at these people. And really the one that I want to focus on here is that isolation and loneliness is literally a killer. Not only because it increases depression and anxiety and that kind of thing, but it has physical health impacts. So that one is very important. And so having what they call your right tribe, find your tribe, be connected to a community of people. So those who are connected to a church, there is evidence that connection pays off in health. Our spiritual lives and our bodies are not disconnected. Our emotional lives and our bodies are not disconnected. So we have to think about those things. Putting loved ones first, making sure that family and those connections, if you are alone and you don't have family, we can create chosen family. And that those relationships are priority and that they don't get second shrift or short shrift from other priorities. And that you have some place where you feel that you belong, that you're known, your name is known, something about your history is known. These are really important things. And the other ones have to do with moving your body and having a sense of purpose. Again, we talked about that before. Finding regular practices of reducing stress. That's important for people my age to start doing at this stage so as to have longevity later. And here's a good one I need to remember, the 80% rule. Stop eating when you're 80% full. Don't keep eating. And this one I really like too. Have a glass of wine at 5 o'clock. Just don't have 5 glasses of wine at 5 o'clock and you're good. So anyway, it's interesting research, and I commend it to you to look that up. There are cookbooks on the Blue Zones cookbooks, like recipes from these different areas that, and conversation and lots going on around that research. So, so that's one piece. Those are some of the, I think, preventative things or the things you can look at to maximize a kind of rich, healthier, fuller life. And perhaps, if we're fortunate, delay that time when we may become less independent. And if we cultivate those relationships before that, then even when we do become less independent, often those friendships will come to us. So prioritizing that and not forgetting that is really important. So I'm going to shift. Any thoughts or questions or anything about any of that? Okay.
I have a thought.
Yeah.
And thinking about my community, the way homes are built these days, everybody's living behind the house.
Yes.
The garages are out front. And they're living behind.
Right.
And I have a dog that gets me out, but there are a lot of times that you don't see anybody because
Right.
they're in the back of the house.
Right. Yeah.
We don't no longer have the front porch,
Yeah.
no longer sitting outside
Yeah,
at night. Pardon?
everybody has a, yeah, they have a deck in the back and not a front porch. Right.
And everybody has air conditioning, so they sit inside.
Right. There's, I mean, there are a lot of things that have led to this, and some are probably intentionally chosen, and some have just been this sort of drift, you know, of social drift, that direction. But if you notice, I mean, one of the things they've seen in these blue zones is that people get out and walk. They don't take the car to the grocery store if it's within a half a mile, they walk. They're much more walkable communities. So if your community is not built to be a walkable community, then, you know, go somewhere and get out and walk where you can. And maybe move somewhere where it's a more walkable community, if you have the means to do that, because it does make a difference. Just having the, you know, the accidental running into people as you're walking your dog. Those are how friendships develop, you know? You start a little conversation and pretty soon you're talking about this or that, and you know you've got something in common, and that's how relationships develop. So especially if you've moved, there are a lot of people moving into Wake Forest in this area from other states, other parts of the country, to retire, but you know, it's hard to develop new relationships at certain times of your life. So those are things to think about. Okay. Now, moving on kind of to that next stage, where folks are less independent and get to the point of real incapacitation, you know, really can't care for themselves, and need to have, you know, either be in a supportive living environment, assisted living, or have nursing care or family or help and support around the clock. You know, that's, again, something we should bring someone in to talk about kind of some of the care options. But in terms of spirituality, I think, and developmentally at that stage, you're sort of starting to shift to where you're really not looking, you know that that death is not that far away. You know that you're going to die sooner than later. And it's that sort of internally preparation for that. There's a lot of life review that begins. When you start hearing people where their main conversation is about the past and about telling stories about the past, that's kind of one of the signs that you're starting to go there, right? Because you have less in your immediate present that engages you. You're less able, you're a little more cut off. And so you reach for that back. And it's just a natural thing that we do. We look back and we take summary of our lives. So it's important for loved ones at that stage, or you know, if you are going through that yourself, again, to have community of people. Invite over the people that you know are good listeners, not good talkers. I mean, it's fun to hear stories from other people too, but it is a time when you need to be heard. So if you're caring for someone in that situation, think about open-ended questions. Ask them about their life, because they want to talk about it. They want to say, you know, they want to talk about their kids or their grandkids or all the stories growing up. They want to talk about where they grew up, what their parents were like. You know, those are precious and important things at that stage. And sometimes families can be a little, like I said, you know, we're going whirling around. And so don't assume that just because somebody has family nearby, that part of them is being attended to. because, like I said, I think somebody else, I need to be aware to be more attentive to my mother-in-law and my mother, and not just like, okay, we're going here and we're going there. And, what do you need, Mom? Okay, good. But to stop and slow down and ask open-ended questions, ask them to talk and tell stories about their lives. It gives them a sense of worth, right? To be heard and to be known and to revisit those stories is really important. And then, so again, this doesn't happen to everyone, but if and when you are caring for someone who begins to enter that sort of last stage of life, we talked last week about hospice care and palliative care. I brought a couple of resources of hospice care providers and palliative care, and so that you have somebody to call, but your doctor, or sometimes if you're in the hospital, the hospitalist, or a social worker in the hospital, are also resources to help you find the kind of care for that stage of life, which is really the end of life. It's when you're actively in the process of beginning to die. So at that stage, let me ask you a question. Tell me, what do you think is most important spiritually at that stage for people who are 6 months or less probably from dying?
One thing I noticed with my mom is that when she had to move from her hometown to another town and get in a rest home, or she was in like a assisted living,
Mm-hmm.
and her church promised they were going to come and visit her,
Mm.
because she had been in that church for 50-some years,
Mm.
maybe 60.
Mm-hmm.
And they might have come one time during the time, and she really missed that, is that she didn't, and they didn't really have that kind of program in there for her, because she was a Sunday school teacher, she was real active in her church at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And she really missed that, and I think that's where I wish they had realized that she needed to have that connection right on, because it was really painful for her, for them not to come and visit
Yeah.
with her.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And it's hard, I'm thinking of some folks who have just moved to this community. It's important for a church to do that for people they don't know as well as for people they do know. So it's particularly painful for somebody who's been a part of a church for 50 years and then nobody comes to visit them. But it's also very lonely and very painful if you've just come to a church and you don't have those kind of natural connections. How does the church minister to you anyway? Jack?
I noticed with my mother that some friends were very good about going to visit her, but there were some that I was surprised didn't, and I decided that some of them didn't want to be in a nursing home type of place because they realized, as being from her cohort, they could be there themselves in another few days or weeks. So there may be a need for an intergenerational
Absolutely.
program of some sort, because those people that have been friends with my mother for so many years, some of them just couldn't bring themselves, I think, to go see her in that state.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I mean, especially skilled nursing facilities are pretty tough. So, Barb, in the back, you had a...
Yeah. My husband died 9 years ago yesterday,
Sorry.
when our friends and I were at his bedside. The most important thing to me was, even if he was not consciously aware of us being there, the most important thing to me was reassuring him that the Lord would pave the way for him. So I had a friend read Psalm 91.
Yep. That,
Like I said, he might not have been aware of it, but it's
so you bring up a couple of good points. And one of the, Kitty said this last week, I think Abigail might have mentioned it too, that those who work in medicine and are around people who are near death, it's very clear that hearing seems to be one of the last things that goes. So you can assume that somebody's not responsive to you, they can't talk, or they're not opening their eyes, that they can't hear you. That's generally not true. They generally can and often can understand you. So important to think about that for their dignity and how you speak about them when you're in their presence and how you speak to them. And don't neglect to speak to them, even though they can't speak back. It's that sense of agency or, and connection. If you're not able to respond, but everybody around you is talking about you and never to you, then you don't feel connected and you don't feel at all empowered. So thinking about those things. And Barb, you brought up another point. One of the things that I think, of course I'm a priest, I think this, but I just absolutely believe it, that at that stage of life, as we're facing death, that we really need kind of continual, gentle reminders. We need to be encouraged to hope, right? We need to hear about both the power of God and the love of God together, right? That we are in God's hands and that God is a God of love. And that resurrection is what we stake our hope in. And because it is our faith, and it makes, it doesn't make it any easier in the moment to experience pain or suffering or loss, but it puts it puts it all in context and can kind of convey to us a peace that passes understanding, right, as Paul talks about. So I would say that's, in terms of emotional life, developmental life, spiritual life, that is the number one thing. That and not being talked about, right? But still having some kind of connection, even if you can't see or hear or respond. And when you are being spoken to, make sure that, you're hearing, that folks are hearing that word of hope. And it doesn't, so call your priest. We can make visits, but it is also something that you should not only depend on your priest for. In other words, there's no reason why you can't sit and read scripture, sit and read Psalms to your loved one and be the bearer of that kind of hope as well. Priests are great to call for, we just can't be there all the time and every day of someone's lengthy period of illness or death. So think about who might else come. We have lay Eucharistic ministry here. Several of you here are involved in bringing communion to folks and praying with folks, and then this visitation ministry that we're trying to start. Hopefully there will be some friendships, that are there, and folks will come by. It can be a little scary if you've not had the experience of being around people who are dying. It can be intimidating. I don't think it's particularly scary, actually, but it's intimidating. If the kind of first few times that you may have had that experience, you can be afraid that you're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. But generally, if you approach with quiet, with respect, with calm, with gentleness, and read some Psalms, and just talk quietly and gently to someone, there's almost no way you can go wrong with that. Julie?
My mom was a musician, so I took a...
Music. Yep.
Late 40s music.
Yep.
And she'd been pretty much comatose. At some point, she lately had dementia rounds. She said, "This is too much. I'm ready to die. You go home." 3 o'clock the next morning.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Marion? Marion?
I was just adding on to like the photos or the
Yes, and sometimes that goes along with dementia, you know, the anger and frustration and sort of bursts of that rage can go with dementia or Alzheimer's. So, yeah, all of these, you know, in the face of some situations, some of these tools just fall flat, right? There's nothing that you can do except as a family member to try to be present as you can be and practice your own patience and calm and being loving and kind. Deborah?
My mom went through that in the last few months, and she said, I'm ready to go, I don't want, anything else. And we kept telling her, it's not your time to go, and when it's your time, you can go. And, but she would be all right with that for a little while, but we did all kinds of things to distract her. She loved to read the Bible, and we'd read the Bible to her, and she'd do her forward day by day, and we'd do that with her. And we had a photo album that I had put together, and it had all different ages of her and my dad and the children, all of the children. And that would distract her some, and we'd get her to talking about what you remember that, Mom? Was that a fun day, or what? And sort of get her mind off of it, and she'd be all right for a while. But she would get back to it.
And the other thing I would say, Denise, is that is the kind of time when maybe friends and extended family is not the best to have visit, but you could certainly ask your priest to come visit at that point, because we've kind of seen a lot of different behavior. It's not like any of it's new, and we're not going to take it personally. And still, you never know, especially with religion. So people's faith. I've been to visit people who, very advanced Alzheimer's, can't swallow anymore. Like their brain has forgotten how to swallow, but they can recite the Lord's Prayer when I start. It's like that stuff is so deep in us and goes so far back in our lives, so many of us, and sometimes just seeing somebody in a collar, if they have good associations with that, then, it can... You can't predict how, what's going to comfort, what's going to help, what's going to stir up. So don't ever hesitate to ask, and to, it is something that I think sometimes you just, you hesitate because you don't want anybody to come get blasted, but we can handle that. So,
Sarah,
yeah.
Talking about how someone can't swallow, but yet they can say the Lord's Prayer. It's interesting to be in a group of people who have dementia or are really aging, but put hymns on.
Yes, yes. The old hymns, yep.
And they might not remember every name, but they'll know every word to that hymn.
Yeah, that's true. And all the parts of the liturgy or, all of that. Which kind of makes me realize I forgot to share something at any stage when people are kind of homebound or ill or recovering, older, younger. The prayer book is always a wonderful resource. And I just want to point you to a few pages. There is, because we know the ones that are all dog-eared are in the middle with the Eucharist on Sunday morning, but go to page 4, pick up your prayer book and go to page, oh goodness, I wrote it down here, 471 to 474. So this is, if you are caring for somebody who is ill, no, wrong page. 453 to 461. I know, I got them dead already, and I'm sorry. 453 is ministration to the sick. And people often think that this is just for the priest to do, and parts of it are, right? Anointing with oil is a priestly function. administering communion, unless it's already been consecrated, is a priestly function. But there are pieces of this. There are little resources embedded in this that you can think about using. There are scripture passages that you can look up and read. Prayers that you can say just independently. And then if you go on to page 458 through 461, you see there's a prayers for the sick, so prayers that you can pray for someone else, a sick child, somebody in recovery, before an operation, for strength and confidence. So those are all good prayers to draw from. On the next page, for the sanctification of illness, in other words, God, turn this thing I'm experiencing to good. Do something good with it. For doctors and nurses who are caring for others, and thanksgiving for the beginning of recovery. Now, page 461 is if you are sick. These are prayers that you might reach and pray for yourself. When I remember visiting Shirley Matheny when she was dealing with cancer, and she told me a number of times that this page was just like, it was getting warm thin. She prayed this every day, morning and night, and I think that can, if what we expect to come of that is that we will be instantly cured, that may not happen, but healing does come. So definitely want to commend that to you. And then the other ones that I was going to pay, that I started to show you, are the page 471 to 474, and that is it's in the burial service, the Rite 1 burial service. Rite 2, for some reason, doesn't lay them out, but in Rite 1, it actually gives you the whole psalm, which is nice if you're in the hospital and you just need, visiting somebody or by their bedside, you can find the whole one. And it's in the Elizabethan or Victorian language or whatever it is, the these and thous. But it also just gives you if you don't know what psalms to read, that's a good resource. Find those psalms, page 471 through 474, and then you can go look them up in a more contemporary version in the Bible if you don't want all the these and thous. But that's a handy resource as well. Okay, now, there's plenty more we could talk about. Before I switch gears, I do want to talk about kind of funeral planning and what to do at the time of death and all that kind of thing. Are there questions or more thoughts or things we need to talk about?
I was just gonna add to the part when we're
End of
talking
life.
about people as they age and they get less connected. I think the touch is another thing that we can
Yes.
think about. So when I did a lot of nursing home
Yes.
care, just sitting down and holding someone's hand and having a good eye-to-eye chat, and listening to their stories or whatever. Telling them a story, or I
Yes.
had one lady who she was completely with it in her 90s, and she loved to, we talked about all the current events kind of thing, but she just loved having some skin-to-skin contact with a human being.
Absolutely. It's that connection, that need for connection. And when you're cared for by a lot of medical professionals, some feel that they can do that and some don't. But there's nothing like the touch of a loved one, right? So if you are connected to somebody by family or dear friend, don't hesitate at that stage. You're not invading their space, and they will let you know. Generally, at that stage of life, people don't hold back. If they're annoyed by you, they will let you know. If you've crossed a line, they will let you know. And then you just back up and find the more appropriate place. But most of the time, people really welcome that touch. A hand on the arm, stroking the face, those things are important. Okay, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and I don't want to keep everybody too long, but I did want to talk a little bit about planning, what to do at the time of death. We talked a little bit about that last week, and planning funerals and that kind of thing. So, as Kitty and Abigail mentioned, there's all kinds of resources to help you. You really don't have to worry about it if your loved one or you die at the hospital or in an institution, a care home of some sort, because there are people who are equipped to do what all that needs to be done at that point. The, pronouncing of death, the removal of the body, all of that. People can help you and walk you through that. What's important, though, as we talked about last week, is for you, if you're caring for someone, to know what the wishes are of the person who you're caring for. And sometimes this can be really tricky because just generationally, in some cases, personality, some people do not want to talk about it. But the way that I have found that, is most helpful is to say, Mom, I know you don't want to talk about this. This is uncomfortable and it's maybe scary, but I want to be able to do what you want. I don't want to do anything that would be undignified for you or that you would, feel awful about. So I need to know what you want, what your wishes are, so that I can do my best to fulfill them. So often you can get a little ways with that. So hopefully if you're dealing with caring for a loved one, that conversation as early as possible, because you never know when death can come, and it does come by surprise sometimes. So have those conversations, and really encourage, if you are caring for somebody, a parent or someone, make sure that they have life insurance, such as at least to care for burial expenses, funeral expenses. It's ungodly expensive, and you don't want that to be held up. I mean, you have to pay for that out of pocket if those plans haven't been made, or to be really struggling to get those things taken care of at that time. So there's small insurance policies where you don't need medical, and all that, just to at least make sure that that's there. And do that for your kids or for others who are looking after you. It allows, as we talked about last week, when you make those plans ahead of time, it allows the people that you leave behind to have the space and time to grieve well, and not to be running around fretting about whether they're going to be able to take care of you and your wishes the way you would have wanted. So make a plan. Leave a copy of that plan, write it down, leave a copy of that plan with your other important documents. Make sure that your kids or your family know where that is. Funeral plans and things like that, you can make them now, you can make them anytime and leave them in the office here, and we will pull them out as soon as somebody passes in our parish. Barbara goes right to that file and looks to see if we have a plan in place, and then we begin to work with the family, if they do, to carry that out. It's very kind to those that you leave behind to give them some direction. So at the time of death, if you are with your loved one when they die at home, then it is important, as Kitty said, that you have to call the police first, because they have to come and pronounce death, and there's just a legal process that has to happen there. But then the next call might be to a funeral home, or the next call might be to your priest. Don't hesitate to call, please, even if it's 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. And not just for your loved one. I mean, there are if you have the sense, or doctors or nurse has told you that death is near, then there are, some of you are newer to this tradition, and some are well versed in this, but we don't actually technically have a thing called last rites. It's an anointing for healing, but when you do that the last time, it's last rites. So what a priest can do is to come and anoint for healing, but in our theology, there's nothing that happens if you don't do it. In other words, it's no special protection or something, but it is just the blessing of God at that very important moment. And if you miss it, you call the priest and it's too late. It's never too late, because there's you'll notice in the prayer book, there's ministration at the time of death. Do not ask me why they put it in a call and response. How does that make sense? Like, who's going to have all their prayer books ready right then at that moment? I don't know. It's crazy. But there's some beautiful prayers that I usually, I will say myself, even though they are supposed to be call and response. But just to mark and acknowledge this enormous passage that has just happened, and to honor God and to honor the life that is going on to larger life. So don't neglect that, and don't think you're bothering anybody to call for that. And it's not just for the person who has passed, but it's for the support, for your support and the support of your family. What else did I want to say about that one part? The other thing I wanted to say about that is, some of us are really doers, right? And I'm like this. Something happens and I think, ooh, kick into gear. Like, what do I got to do? This, and this. When somebody that you love has just passed, take a minute. You don't have to rush right away. This is the last time that you will be with that person in the flesh. And there's no reason why you have to rush to call the police or call the funeral home or even call the priest if you want to be with that person alone. Make sure that you give yourself a little bit of space to say, and to just be with that person for a few more minutes. Because even if you have a viewing later, it's not the same, and you won't be alone with them. You'll be with a room full of people or with your family. So it's different, and that is a sacred moment. It's a holy time, so don't rush through it. There's no need to rush. And the police and the funeral home folks are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can always get them, so take your time. Okay. Planning for burial and cremation or celebration of life. I have put together a whole little package of stuff that you all can take home and look at. So let me just tell you what's in this. I put on the front of this is the form that I use whenever I'm planning a funeral. It's a front and back page, and there's a lot of stuff. Not all of it pertains to any one service, but it has sort of all the options that you can think about and all the things you have to think about at one point or another. It's not a bad thing to go through as you're thinking about planning your own service. And again, this may seem like a weird or morbid thing to do, to plan your own funeral service. The priests in the church are expected to teach you about this because it's important. And again, it's part of you caring for your own families, because it's very distressing to not know what your loved ones want.
You can write your own obituary.
Yep.
And your children will love you for it. They may or may not use it.
Yeah.
They will appreciate the fact that you put it together.
Right. And it's a neat exercise too, because it kind of helps you reflect about.
And make sure your kids know where it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And along with that, I wasn't here last week, I'm sorry, I was out of town. I'm sure everybody got advice on trusts and all that sort of stuff. I hope somebody reminds you, let somebody that you really trust know where all your passwords are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we did cover that.
That's one of the most, where his passwords are.
Passwords.
And that includes your miles, airline miles and stuff, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
And make sure in your will also, you express clearly how you want to end, what kind of things they may do at the hospital.
Yes, yes.
We just
That's what we talked about last week. We went into great depth about it. It is very important to make those things and to think about it ahead of time and not be rushed to make those decisions at the last moment. So this is that form. You can take this packet home. This has that. So it gives you all the things you might want to think about. And if there's some kind of acronym or something that you don't understand, just call me or email me. But that will help. There's the second page of this has information about St. John's, our columbarium here, and the options that are available and the costs. There's a application for the columbarium. If you want to use that, I was just told by Barbara this morning, this particular version is a little bit outdated. So you might want to actually call her and get an updated copy. In this packet, there are also just a bunch of all the scripture lessons that are suggested as possible scriptures for, and that doesn't mean you have to use these, but these are good ones to choose from. And then the last page is hymns for our traditional service. Before we get to that part, that I'd like you to just pick that up, think about it, make an appointment with me or with Philip or Stephen, any one of us, and sit down and go over this with you, and then put it in the file, and then it's ready. And you can take a copy of it home, and you put it with your other important papers, tell your family it's there, and then you don't have to think about it again, unless you change your mind of what you want to do. So in terms of options, it's really interesting. When I first was ordained 25 years ago almost, I had a lot more services with caskets and traditional burials in the graveyard. And I think we had one this year, and that was, I don't know how many years it's been since I've had a casket in a traditional gravesite. Well, maybe there was one 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Anyway, it's less and less common. Cultural, we just change, cultural change. But you get to choose what you want to do. And there are options all around. And I have listed out, there's one here, resources for funeral and burial arrangements. There's 2 funeral homes locally. Many of you know them, have used them before. Bright Funeral Home and Clancy Strickland Wheeler, right up here on Durham Road. I've worked with both of them here at the church. They both were wonderful and have good reviews from family members who have used them. And then there's Pine Forest Memorial Gardens, which is sometimes just where folks are buried if they're buried. But they also do have cremation niches, and they have cremation services. They also have, I want to tell you about something. This is new to me in just the last few years, but I want to pass this along in case you've not heard of this. Have you heard about green burial? Yeah, natural burial. So there's this kind of movement that's happened, and I think all 3, well, I don't know about Bright, but Clancy, Strickland Wheeler, and Pine Forest offer green burial. And it's just that your body, the body of the deceased is not prepared with any non-biodegradable, like embalming and all of that is not good for the environment, not good for the earth. It's not biodegradable. And then traditional coffins often are made with metals and materials that themselves just stay and stay and stay forever, right? So a more sort of a way of your body naturally going into the earth eventually. Some people find that appealing, and that's what green burial is. So no use of chemicals or embalming fluids and that kind of thing. And they don't do any of the makeup and all that kind of stuff that you would do for a traditional viewing to prepare a body. So, and often you can use literally cardboard or very light wood, or nothing at all, and just burial in the dirt. So it's an interesting, and it's an option that you could explore with those companies. You had Bob.
I was going to say, so we experienced both my parents wanted to be cremated, and the first time we used the funeral home service, my parents died 7 months apart because they were buried for 65 years, and that's what happens. And they were older. But the interesting thing was when my dad died, the funeral home actually said, why don't you just call the crematory
traditional,
funeral home with, and that was straight to cremation. We didn't have a viewing, we didn't have any services in terms of the church because they were going to Arlington. So, I just, it's another option to think about if you're thinking cremation.
Yes.
You could actually contact the North Carolina Crematorium Society.
or the Neptune Society. There are a few different places that, and there's a bit here on the back of this page about comparing the costs of cremation versus traditional burial. It is like a third of the cost, sometimes a quarter of the
And
cost.
the Cremation Society of North Carolina is the name of it may even be a nonprofit,
Yeah,
but the cost is strictly the cost of the
cremation
cremation.
itself, right.
But if that happens, you have to plan everything else.
Yourself, correct,
And
Right.
that's something that can catch you by surprise.
right. That's why it's helpful to think about all these things ahead of time, and I can help you, or one of the other priests on staff can help you, thinking not just about the service, but thinking about what you want to do in terms of, do you want to go and talk with a funeral home? They can give you all kinds of options. They also are, and I'm not speaking about any particular one, but just in general as an industry, tend to want to try to upsell and sell you things and services that, they're trying to make a profit. So you have to be thoughtful and do it, and it's also a good reason why to do it ahead of time, when you're not emotional and deciding to get the very best for your loved one when it's going to cost you utterly way too much. Barb, and then Gordon. I knew it was.
In some communities, they require a permit for burial on private property.
Right, you need to know the laws of the state, whatever you decide to do. I mean, you can, I forget, but I do believe there's something about burial at sea, there are laws about that, but you can Google that and find information about that, or you can talk to a funeral home, and they will tell you, they'll be able to tell you what the laws are. Court?
Composting is another green disposal, biodisposal method. Do you know if there are any facilities around here that
Composting human remains? I don't know. I've not heard of that.
It's big in Oregon and Washington.
Is it?
State.
Is it?
It's a
Interesting.
new thing that's-
Yeah, I mean,
Composting.
yeah,
You can Google that about composting.
yeah, find out more about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I haven't heard of that one. That's a new one, but, okay.
Another thing, you can bury a cremation urn it comes in a cardboard
Yep.
box.
Yep,
You can bury that
Right.
in a regular cemetery.
Yep.
If that's what you want.
and you can bury it right out here in the columbarium.
Well,
So we have
certainly.
we have columbarium, so there's everything, lots of options. There's everything from traditional burial with a casket in a graveyard to mausoleum to cremation niches, which we have here as well, single or double. I loved it. Who was it? It was saying they wanted their husband to be
Bigger than home space.
right. And then there was another one like, make sure you put me in last because I want to be first in front of. Oh my gosh. Okay. But there's niches. There's also a garden just for ashes. So and there's a plaque. If you notice, there are plaques out there. So there's the prices are here for the niches. A single niche is $14.50. A dual niche is $19.00. And then the memorial garden, that's just the ashes in the garden and the plaque is $760. So there are good options for different price levels, and there are many, many, many options out there. So if you need help sorting that through, I'm happy to help point you in a direction for some of the stuff that we don't actually do here, but we could plan all together. Yeah.
What are your thoughts about vigils?
Vigils for
For,
the deceased.
When my husband died,
Uh-huh.
casket was brought into
Uh-huh.
the church the night before, and all night long, the
Mhm.
church was open.
That is a very sort of old traditional practice that in 25 years, I've never been asked to arrange that. So I wouldn't say it's super common anymore, but, you know, I find it very hard to say no to people who are grieving. So if you want to ask me to get something done, come to me when you've just lost somebody. Because I just don't, you know, in general, if it is at all within reason and you ask me to do it during the time of laying a loved one to rest, that's likely to happen. I mean, unless it's totally absurd. I don't know, like you want a clown to come do flips down the aisle in the middle of the service. Usually what people ask is very reasonable. And, you know, if that was desired, I would be happy to organize that for a family. You know, those are options. Like I said, I've never encountered that, but that's a beautiful thing. So talk to me if you have interests. It's important to do the thing that makes it special for you and for your loved one, right? It should not just be like a transaction that happens with the church or anybody else.
Declaration of death.
Yes.
You said you call the police first?
If you're,
Unexpected.
if it's an unexpected death at home. So if you're not connected with a hospice program or a doctor who knows that you're close to death or whatever, then if it's an unexpected death, yeah, it's expected that you call the police so that they just come, and I think there's a sort of a preliminary, just make sure that this was natural causes, and then pronunciation of death. But the hospice folks, or, you know, if your doctor is on call with you at a certain point because your spouse or friend is near death, then you could call the doctor, and often they'll tell you what to do. Yeah, they'll come or they'll tell you what to do. Okay, so that's all I have. Are there any other questions really about? Oh, I did want to say one thing about that's very, if you are newer to the Episcopal Church, that is distinctive about the Episcopal Church when it comes to death is that it's not a somber affair when we celebrate the life of one who has died. It's an Easter liturgy, which means it is about the joy of resurrection and the gift of life, life on this earth and life everlasting. And so it is meant to be something of a celebration. Now, if somebody dies of a violent crime, or, you know, of course you have to, or young, you know, and even dying of natural causes in your 90s, there's going to be grief. You know, nobody's denying that. And it's just that it is not a moment for us to bang on the pulpit and make sure everybody gets saved before they die. It's this is our opportunity to celebrate life and the gift and the grace of God in life and death. So it's a joy. It can be a very joyful thing. So please make your plans. And know that it can be a meaningful spiritual experience to do that. It's not just something you should do. But think about the hymns that you most love, that give you joy and bring you hope and sustenance, and pass those on to your family so they can enjoy them on that day. You know, these are meaningful, beautiful things.
Along the line of that, Thanksgiving's coming up. It's an excellent time to do some of this stuff with your family.
That's right, your family.
Before you go out and play football, you have a few moments on this.
Just don't have too many drinks before you sit down to do it.
Actually, that helps.
One might help. All right. Well, thank you all for staying. Please come get these resources if you want. There's also a list of palliative care and bereavement and support counseling.